Good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome to today's webinar entitled Redesigning the Doctorate for the 21st Century. Over the course of the next 35 to 45 minutes or so, we'll be listening to a discussion about the impacts that developments in the real world have had on the doctorate from Dr. Margaret Kiley from Australian National University, and explore how our new programme, Supervising Doctoral Studies, second edition, can help your institution best support supervisors negotiating these developments. This will be followed by a brief Q&A. You'll hear from three people today. Firstly, my name is Matthew O'Donoghue. I'm a marketing executive at Epigeum. Secondly, Dr. Margaret Kiley, adjunct in the Research School of Humanities and Arts, Australian National University, and a member of the Supervising Doctoral Studies Advisory Board. Thirdly, Emma Gallen is part of our publishing team and is the commissioning editor for Supervising Doctoral Studies. Emma will share an overview of the new programme. And so with no further ado, I will pass you on to Dr. Margaret Kiley.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthew, and welcome everyone. Matthew said good morning, everyone, but to those of you in Australia and New Zealand, good evening. It's 5:05 here in Canberra. And that means it must be about 7:05 over across the ditch. And I understand, I don't know who's the people, but I understand we have a few colleagues from Malaysia, so you're probably about 3 p.m, I'm guessing. So yeah, welcome everybody, and thank you very much to the Epigeum people for inviting me to say some things here and letting me play with some ideas. And if I say play and have fun, I don't mean to trivialize. I mean literally, I've been sort of just playing with the ideas rather than anything that I think is madly specific and so on. So I was just thinking, and when I was thinking, was in light of the research based on topics that have guided the supervisory doctoral studies and so on, second editions, I've been challenged to ask, what might this mean for the doctorate in the 21st century? So that was just my question to myself. So let's imagine, here's what I was thinking. Imagine that we have been invited by a broad international committee of universities and to work together to design an internationally agreed doctoral program for implementation by 2030. So if we move on to the next slide, please. At the end of that slide, I say, so a tiny bit of background first. So next slide explains the background. We've just had two major things where there was the original medieval doctorate or PhD that we had in France, Italy, and so on, 12, 13, 1400s. That earlier current version PhD was about learning to be able to teach. So if we look at the next slide, as it says there, it was about learning to not only how to teach, but the knowledge to teach and to profess. And it was often in areas like law and theology. And you all know that. I know a lot of you would know that, back to front. You'll also know that in the early 1800s, when Humboldt changed it, we had that Humboldtian version where we moved from teaching to it being a research degree. So moving ahead, I thought, I wonder what it would be if we looked at something like that from now. What might be the aims of a 21st century doctorate? And I'm using the term doctorate very deliberately here, just to be a bit contentious. Yes, those of you who know me know I love to do that. I'm including the PhD, the DPhil, the professional doctorate, the practice doctorate, and those other versions that we have of the doctorate at the moment. So what might be the aims of that 21st century doctorate? So going to the next slide, it seems to me that we might be looking at someone who makes an original contribution to the discipline. And that was a lot of the work that came from the Carnegie Initiative on the doctorate, that it's about contributing to the discipline and developing the discipline and so on, so that the discipline of history grows and gets stronger and so on. That might be an aim, one of the aims. It might be to learn the knowledge and skills needed to do future research. So the first one might be that you've already got some of those from your previous study, and here you're making the time you spend is making the actual contribution, whereas the other one is learning the knowledge and skills. Then you can go out and do research in the future. Fairly somewhat different there. Another one might be to educate candidates, and I've played around with words like students and candidates, even employees, because it may well be that we perhaps think about the way in many Scandinavian universities, the candidate is actually an employee of the university, and her or his employment is to actually undertake the research learning and so on to get the PhD. So take that as a general term I'm using. Educate candidates who can liaise and bring about the links between research and practice, and application or practice, or that sort of translational notion of research. So they're good at bringing together rather than spending time in their own particular area of doing it. It could be that perhaps we think the major aims might be to make a contribution to society and to communities, cultural, geographic, all sorts of things with different communities. Maybe that's what it's all about. Maybe it's to graduate knowledge workers who can contribute to the economy. A strong term used a lot now, the notion of the knowledge worker. Although I can remember, and those of you who've been to the QPR conference will know what I'm talking about, when a young PhD candidate that I was doing some work with, she went to the conference, and this was about 10 years ago, and 12 years ago probably, and all she heard was the term knowledge worker. And she came back, she said, I thought I was just learning to be a researcher. I didn't know I was going to be a knowledge worker. And she found that quite sort of, intriguing, that that's how she was being perceived, as a knowledge worker. But the other aim might be to develop future academics, which is how we often see the current doctorate, as implicitly developing future academics. So if we go to the next slide, you'll find this is the first of our polls or our ideas to decide what just to put what you think. So what do you think are the most important aims to develop? And I won't go through them each time, but this one, I deliberately didn't put them in the same order I've just spoken about, just to be a bit tricky, me. To develop future academics might be your first one. To provide skilled members of the knowledge economy, maybe you put that 3 or 4, I don't know. To educate learners, to contribute to and develop the discipline itself, or other. And that's if you want to say something particularly there, some really specific, exciting, wonderful new idea that you have, please put that in the questions. So I'm going to be quiet. When you've finished doing that, Matthew is going to show you the poll and how you've all voted. So I'll just be unusual and stop talking. Knowledge economy and the discipline itself. Wow, okay. I've got to write those down, and the discipline. Thank you for that. That gives me a good idea of where we're heading. Thanks very much. So we'll return back to my slides for my thinking about. The next one will be, I'm pretty keen on discussing this one, and that is what might be the value of the interdisciplinary researcher. You've just said about developing the discipline, but maybe we can talk about the interdisciplinary researchers. So for the next slide, what I do is I chat about the fact that just wonder, could we have graduates from the 21st century doctorate who are certainly expert in a particular sub-discipline or discipline, depending on how we want to think about it, and who also can appreciate and understand the key approaches of other disciplines. So, it's not that, oh, yeah, I'm a quantitative researcher, she just does qual, all that talking to people things, or vice versa. But in fact, understanding why different approaches are important and how they work and so on and so forth, and who are also able to explain their research approaches and their ideas and so on to those from different disciplines, so that whilst there is some discipline research, it's much broader than just that for each of the learners that we have. I'm just wondering whether if we had that as an overall kind of approach, what might that be as a benefit for the individual or the society? Just been thinking about it quite a bit lately. So if you go to the next slide, we've got the fact that, to vote on this one, strong disciplinary expertise is essential, high priority for interdisciplinary research, or hey, who cares, stop fussing about it, just get on and do the job, or other. So I will now again be quiet and leave you to work on the poll, please, just on your views of how that should work or how that could work. 56 to 52, the interdisciplinary team. Wow, I love that. So discipline and interdisciplinary. Well, that's going to be interesting when we come towards the end of our session here today. So thank you, Matthew. We might return now to my next little challenging set of questions that I've got. So on the next slide, What I was thinking, where might learners and their learning be located? So as I outline in the next slide that Maddie's moving on, could the candidate be located within an industry environment, perhaps an academic environment, but not necessarily, and that could be perhaps at a university, but as a professional staff, in a community, a social environment, Indigenous environment, professional environment. So they're actually doing their work there, but they come to the university for specific activities. So they're not located full time in the university and perhaps go out occasionally. They're out and come in occasionally. The coming in, given recent events, would probably be online and Zoom and so on, but in the other days it would be actually literally driving in and coming to sessions and so on, or doing sessions at an international level and so on and so forth. So the location of the person is outside the university sort of precinct, I guess. The other one I thought of was that could be, in light of what you said about the interdisciplinary, it could be that candidates work in a well-structured interdisciplinary university environment and they spend most of their time there, and the challenges and the learning they do is about learning to understand other disciplines and how to explain their own discipline to others and to do that kind of interaction stuff. The third way, and there's others, but there I only had room for a few, was to spend about a quarter of the program. So in Australia, if you take a 4-year program, so 1 year, but whatever, to undertake specific community or professional work related to the area of study, but you're based within the university environment, but you go out, it might be a few months, 3 or 4 months, or 3 months each year, or it might be in a chunk, something like the current internship that some universities have, but it's not just to learn about it. It might be to work with the community, work with the profession along the lines of what you're sort of doing as a candidate. So if I invite us to move to the next slide, you'll see that there's a poll again, so just giving you those different options just to try and get a feel for how things are going. This one about they be located in an operational environment with links to a university. So you're outside but links inside, as opposed to the number 4, which is working within the university with links to the outside. So just sort of imagining the learner in one of those two is how I was trying to get that one, or other. Yeah, the interdisciplinary is not as high as I thought it might have been, but this is going to be even more interesting if we have a discussion at the end, depending on how much time we've got. But I'm going to gallop on because I want you to have plenty of time to see what the new Epigeum program looks like, and then we can come back to questions at the end. So if we move to the next slide, what products might be expected? Now, the word products, I know I don't like, but I was going to say outcomes, outputs, all that sort of thing, but I thought, oh, well, we'll put products. What products might we expect? So looking at the next slide, we talk about it could be, as it currently sort of is, a monograph, a book, a movie, a TV show, all those sorts of things. It could be 3 to 5, I'm just suggesting, standalone peer-reviewed papers. So I, as a doctoral candidate, publish 3 to 5 really good papers in top-class journals. They're peer-reviewed, so what more could anyone do? They don't need to assess and examine me. I've got that by having done those papers and had them peer-reviewed. The other one could be to have the papers woven into the monograph as the current thesis by published paper we certainly have in Australia and in New Zealand, and I think to some extent in Malaysia. The focus could be on the person as the outcome. So what it is we're looking not so much as the research they've put out, but them as the potential future liaison between knowledge, research and practice, the person who can go and do future research and so on and so forth. And then there was one I thought we could have a number of requirements. So I know that there'll be eyes rolling at this, particularly those of you who are deans of graduate research. You'll be turning yourself inside out at the thought of what I'm about to suggest, but just hear me out. A number of requirements set out as an individually designed program for each candidate. So they come, they sit down, and you talk about the program that is their program specific to them. So in the next slide, I've just given some ideas of how I could see that might look. So it might be, you could have 2 peer-reviewed journal papers, might be one of the requirements. an agreed requirement. Another one would be a series of lectures or talks to undergraduates or school students. I was thinking, you know, if you were doing some fairly sophisticated mathematics research and work, you might, if you could go and explain that to year 8 students and the way they understood, you'd probably say that you had understood what you're talking about, and that would get the tick of approval. It might be that you make a substantial contribution to industry or the community. You make presentations to the community, I mean, the 3MT, things like that. So I was thinking that each candidate would have a slightly different program that they would negotiate and then complete. And the criterion for successful completion would be built into the program. As I said, I can see eyes rolling about the amount of work, but just think about it. You know, each person's program would be their own designed, negotiated program. So moving on to the next slide where we have the polls, I'll be very looking forward to what that one might come. So the first one is a set of products to meet the needs of each individual program, and the rest are, you can see us, the sort of the more standard ones. So obviously some people who aren't deans of grad studies here, or maybe they are and they're just not, you know that they don't have to do the supervision. Okay, oh, I love that. Thank you very much. Really interesting. Individual programs, and then the researcher and the thesis, as we have at the moment. Okay, so let's moving on. I've got about another 5 minutes, and I want to get through a few more so we can then talk at the end about some ideas. So what about assessment? What assessment strategies and approaches? Now, some of you will know that this is a key issue in Australia at the moment, where a number of universities have or are introducing the oral exam, whereas in New Zealand they've had it for some time, and Malaysia also, as far as I know, is the standard practice there. But anyway, let's have a look. So some ideas that I had in the next slide. So we have a milestone program where there's a formal assessment of written and oral work involving at least one external person for each of the milestones. And so that goes throughout the whole program, and at any time, you know, you'd be working it out whether they continue or not continue. And it would be fairly formal and, as I said, external. The alternative that I'm suggesting is something similar to what is now in most places, more informal assessment throughout until the final submission of the work with a written and oral assessment. Or, as I said in the earlier one, assessment based on published work and products and patents. So, you know, if a PhD candidate has been in a project that has developed a really fantastic patent, would that be enough to be able to say, beauty, you're done, graduate, once COVID's over and you can actually go across the stage and properly graduate? Or again, would you base it on the individualised program you'd build in for each person? It would be slightly different depending on the program, the aims of the program, the way it was going to be done, and so on and so forth. So again, polling, let's see how you go, voting for your preference on what sort of assessment you think the 21st century doctorate might look like. Yeah, okay, I think that's probably the way I was thinking may well be. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on, we're nearly there. You might be surprised at this one. Of course you won't be. In light of all of this, what kinds of supervisors would be appropriate? I mean, clearly the sort of supervisor that you would want, if we look at the next page, it doesn't state it here, but it's going to state it in a moment, and that is someone who's completed the Epigeum Supervisor Development Studies program. But let's just work through this first before we get to that point. Someone who's highly skilled as a researcher in their discipline. So you just pretty well like we have now, great skill, great knowledge, great researcher. That's who we want. Or would it be that we want someone from outside the university sector who represents all those other users of our experiences and our knowledge? Just a thought. Or a group of experts deliberately choosing from different locations in terms of the industry, the government, community, academia, that the candidate would approach as needed. So maybe you deliberately have a team of 3 or 4, with only one perhaps being inside the university sector and the others being specifically outside. And I tried to, I mean, I know the word industry is supposed to be inclusive, but I'm thinking of community, government, and so on and so forth. And then someone who's flexible enough to turn their hand to whatever the candidate needed. That's probably asking a bit much of a supervisor, but let's see. Let's look at the polling and just see what you think. For the next one, the poll preference is flexible, broad skills, expert, great communicator and educator, or okay, over to you. Okay, thank you very much. So just a few, the next slide, I'm just adding a few brief thoughts because I was timed to this and I'm keeping pretty close to time at the moment. Just so if we look at the next one, next slide, here are some of the thoughts that I had that you would need to think about the length of such a program. Would we still be looking at 3 or 4 years? Might it be 2 years? Might it be whatever? Would we need to? What about the entry requirements? Do you want someone who really already has all those research knowledge and skills, or is the program about developing them? Or bit by bit, let's just, the moment that's changed, it did the different ways that universities think about the entry requirements of candidates. What would be the content that we would need to consider? Is it going to be fairly content-based, or is it going to be, no, whatever? What other sorts of additional development and support would candidates require to complete such a program? These were just things that were coming across my mind when I was sort of thinking about the whole program. But next slide, please. I'm going to offer as one other option. Should we consider the following? So if we go to the next slide, it's perhaps we should, as a committee, don't forget we were commissioned to do this as a committee, that's what we're imagining. We would recommend that the current range of models works well and suits different histories, traditions, cultures, topics, so on and so forth. And these various models should be actively encouraged to flourish to meet the disciplinary and candidate employment and institutional, country and economic needs, not try to be a one-size-fits-all model. That was just the way I was thinking toward the end. So you have one more vote and then I'm going to finish off. So please, if we look at the next vote, this is your fun vote. Do we want to encourage the current varied methods and really make them flourish and recognise the values of different styles and ways of doing things? Or should, as a globalised world, we be working towards a single internationally recognised model? I will mute myself now while we talk about the other issues that with the whole program and so on, and we'll come back and have a bit of a chat about that afterwards.
Thank you very much for that, Margaret. That was absolutely fascinating.
Thanks, Matthew.
And I'll now pass you over to Emma Gallen.
Thanks very much, Matthew. And thank you, Margaret. That was a really interesting guide and run through a very rich and thought-provoking set of possibilities. And I think it's clear that whatever the doctorate might look like in the near future, there's a need for doctoral supervisors to feel confident and fully supported in balancing a complex set of multiple roles and supervising a diverse range of doctorates. And of course, that complexity and diversity is already something that characterises the supervisor's role. And it's something that the team behind the second edition of Supervising Doctoral Studies has been thinking very deeply about over the last 18 months over the course of developing the programme. So I'm really delighted to introduce to you all today the second edition of Supervising Doctoral Studies, which is due to publish this month. It's a comprehensive and interactive online supervisor development programme, providing effective training in the core principles and practices of doctoral supervision to equip new and more experienced supervisors in supporting doctoral candidates' development into independent researchers. It really recognises research supervision as a complex and distinct academic practice, requiring supervisors to develop a specific set of skills, knowledge and understanding to guide a diverse range of candidates to successful and timely completion and beyond. And so the second edition has been fully revised and updated to ensure that all supervisors are equipped to deal with the emerging developments and challenges in this field of practice. And you'll be able to use it flexibly as a standalone programme or to support and complement existing supervisor development initiatives at institutions as a comprehensive resource that can be accessed online at any time. So here's the programme overview. It's a 5-hour programme consisting of 10 30-minute modules. We've taken a modular approach to the structure of the second edition to improve navigation in response to feedback and to ensure that the programme is more manageable and accessible. Supervisors can choose to take any of these modules in order as a full development program, or they can dip in and dip out and access modules at point of need or according to institutional requirements. And as you can see from this overview, we've aimed to be quite comprehensive in the content coverage and to address all aspects of a doctoral journey, whatever that journey may actually look like. And for some time now, the supervisor's role has needed to focus on supporting the candidate in their more holistic development as a researcher, rather than simply completing a research project or producing a thesis. And so this has been reflected in the coverage and design of the second edition. It's all gone through quite a significant update from the first edition, and all content has been revisited and revised to ensure that it's fully up to date, current and relevant. In particular, we've included new and expanded content on particular areas or topics of current priority, including research in mental health and well-being, respectful relationships, which is something I know that is quite a key priority in Australia at the moment, power dynamics related to that, team supervision, online supervision, of course, particularly in light of the global pandemic, employability, especially beyond academia, diversity and inclusion, and research culture. So Supervising Doctoral Studies was developed through the process of global collaboration that Matthew touched on at the start of this webinar, and we are able through this to draw on the expertise and experience of a team of advisors, authors, reviewers, and our partner institutions to ensure that the finished programme is of the highest quality. We've been extremely fortunate to work with a wonderful advisory board, and alongside Dr. Margaret Kiley, the members included Professor Douglas Halliday and Professor Stan Taylor, and all three have provided guidance on the overarching vision, the aims and the shape of the programme, and have reviewed and advised on the developing materials at every stage of the process. Margaret, Douglas and Stan also authored a number of the modules, and the authoring team also included Dr. Claire Edtition, Dr. Kelly Guerin, Professor Rachel Spronken-Smith and Dr. Alex Standen. And it's been a great source of personal pleasure for me to work with this group, and their expertise, their understanding of what support doctoral supervisors need, and their creative activity ideas are really present on every screen. We set up a review panel as well right at the outset of development, and this is made up of specialists in doctoral education and supervisor development, but also a number of doctoral supervisors as well, to ensure that we got the guidance and approach right from their perspective. And so the panel reviewed the content at 4 different stages of development and provided comprehensive and valuable feedback at each stage. I should also add that we had a mental health and wellbeing advisor take a look at the relevant aspects of the course to ensure that we got the language and approach right from that perspective too. So a year ago today, in fact, our development group members, which involved institutions from the UK, India and 13 institutions from Australia, came together at the Project Startup Workshop in London, back in the days when we were all able to travel much more freely. And this workshop involved reviewing draft content outlines, presentations and roundtable discussions on key topics to ensure that the programme would meet the needs of the universities and supervisors. And then this summer, just gone, the development group reviewed and provided feedback on the initial online build of the modules, and they were able to test out the activities for the first time in their interactive form. And then from that feedback that we received, we and the authors were able to revise the modules further, ready to develop them into their final published form. I think something that we've benefited from greatly is the range of expertise and perspectives that the review panel and development group have brought at every stage as part of this collaborative approach. The sharing of a variety of viewpoints, best practices, systemic differences and approaches has really helped to shape the programme and to refine the content significantly. Some of the key priorities and themes that emerged from the review feedback that we've been very careful to incorporate have included diversity in all its forms. So this is, the diverse range of candidates and supervisors themselves, the types of doctorate, modes of study, motivations for study, disciplines, sectors, terminologies, institutional processes. The list goes on, and Margaret's presentation earlier hinted at just what that diversity could look like in the future as well. The level is another important point, and we've received very useful feedback on ensuring that the materials are suitable for both newer and more experienced supervisors. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And finally, ensuring that the scenarios that we've included throughout are authentic and believable has been incredibly important. And some very good ideas for these have been provided by our reviewers and development group throughout. At Epigeum, we put in a lot of work into planning and developing the learning design for our programs. And for Supervising Doctoral Studies, our main focus was on how to most effectively support knowledge acquisition for this audience's level of experience, how to increase engagement with the program content, how to ensure that the supervisor is an active driver of their own learning, and how to ensure that the activities chosen most effectively develop and test the learning points to be made. So we've developed the pedagogical framework on screen that you can see for this program, and it underpins the module content throughout. So input content is content designed to provide information and to introduce key concepts and contextual material. And this can be done very effectively through video, animation, infographics, and through incorporating supervisors and candidates' voice. Development content is content designed to develop knowledge and test concepts of varying levels of complexity. So this could include activities such as multiple choice questions, reflective text entry, branching activities, drag and drops, and other kinds of interactive or questioning activities. And then each module closes with an application screen, which is either a scenario or a real case study plus interactive questions again, to enable the supervisor to apply the concepts they've learned in a realistic set of circumstances. So I'm now going to briefly run through some of the main features of the new edition, but you will also be able to request trial access, so you can have a look through and test out some of these activities and features for yourself as well. So as I mentioned, all content has been revised to ensure it's up to date and relevant, and new and expanded content on topics of current priority has been included. So for example, respectful supervisory relationships, as you can see on screen there. And in fact, that useful links pod on the right-hand side contains a link to the Australian Council for Graduate Researchers webpage on their principles for respectful supervisory relationships. Speaking of pods, these are clickable buttons on most of the screens at the right-hand side that supplement the main activities and contain additional information, resources, useful links to follow, practical examples, that kind of thing. And each module actually also contains a resource bank full of useful sources and links to further reading on top of this. As you can see on screen, there's a Your Context pod, and these are pods that, depending on the chosen method of accessing the program, these can be customized by institutions, and you can include your own local information or links to relevant policies, guidance, anything you like. We've also included leadership and management pods throughout, and these are aimed at more experienced supervisors that might be looking to develop their role in the management of doctoral studies and supervision in their department or their institution. And these contain extra guidance, links and resources. So that's just one example of some additional features that we've included for those more experienced supervisors. Scenario-based learning, as I mentioned, features really strongly in every module, and often in combination with questions or branching activity or action aids. So supervisors have the opportunity to decide what they want to do in that position and to practice applying the guidance they're given in the module. And yeah, as I mentioned, we've been trying to make these scenarios as realistic and authentic as possible. Video interviews and audio interviews as well, with both supervisors and candidates at the development group universities featured throughout the programme, sharing their experiences, real-life case studies and practical advice. And in many of the modules, actually, users can select from either arts and humanities, social sciences or STEM options to hear the interviews with people in the field that most closely matches their own. Interactive graphics and professional animations provide context and clarify key concepts throughout. And I'm particularly excited to introduce to you the new pre-programmed diagnostic tool. And this will be based around a range of scenarios and recognises that users will bring their own particular set of skills and experience to the programme. And this can vary greatly from supervisor to supervisor, as we know. So the diagnostic tool will ask users to rate their levels of confidence in each given scenario. And as well as providing immediate feedback on the modules that would be helpful, the tool will generate a personalised list of recommended modules to prioritise or spend more time on for that particular supervisor. And of course, there's material in every module that will help to enhance the practice of all supervisors, both new and experienced, but this tool will help users to navigate their way through the programme and set their priorities for their own development. And finally, from me, each module ends with a summative reflective question tied to one or more of the module learning outcomes to consolidate the learning. And completion of this question and ticking a little checkbox that follows allows administrators at institutions to run reports on who's completed that programme and question, and can be used to generate a certificate of completion. So I'll now hand back to Matthew.
So just thank you once again to Dr. Margaret Kiley and Emma Gallen for all their hard work, and to everyone for attending. Have a lovely evening.